Like, do you go into science fiction? Do you go into climate fiction? Do you decide that I want to focus only on this kind of story, right? What sells, right? Yeah, maybe I should translate stories, right? We have writers who go from genre to genre, hoping that in this thing they'll find commercial success or recognition, right? So you find that the handling of the career as a writer, not even thinking of it as a career, as more as a kind of maybe a spiritual journey, if I may use those two loaded words, right? In which you come to understand yourself as a human being. And this is rarely talked about in writing workshops. We never mention the emotional struggles. Many of us, especially these days, come from a place of anxiety. It's the age in which we live. It's the way we have been raised. It's a world in which we are facing, and we find there's a lot of anxiety. So in one workshop, I remember I asked how many of you are on medication, right? And it turned out some 30% or 40% were on medication, right? And this fact is never taken into account when we teach the class, for example. It's just never. The idea is that you are in a mental place where you can focus on issues of point of view or issues of, let's say, should I tell this from beginning with a flashback or beginning with in the middle of the story. Those technical questions are not what's really bothering the writers, right? So I said that since I don't have the time, we are only there for 2 weeks. We don't meet. We don't meet them after that. Right? Generally we don't meet the writers, and I didn't get the feeling that we were doing enough. We were doing enough to really make a difference. So I knew that there was an issue with the way the writing workshop model that we have in India and elsewhere comes from one place. It comes from the University of Iowa, right? It's the Iowa workshop model, and in the Iowa workshop model, it was started in 1940s. And in that workshop model, what happens is a group of people gather. They're usually led by some writing instructor, sometimes a celebrity. And there are about 15 to 16 students. And maybe it's for 2 weeks, maybe it's for 6 weeks, maybe it's for a semester, right? And during that whole period, they will read stories. They will read the stories of famous stories. They will read the stories of their fellow students, fellow participants. And they'll sit in a circle and they'll critique each other's stories, right? So you have students critiquing students' stories, and then the instructor or the facilitator would say, maybe you should look at this thing, or maybe you should look at that, and the conversation will go in that direction, right? So this is the Iowa model, and the idea is that if you do this repeatedly over story after story after story, your story as well as your friend's stories, you begin to get you're seeing in the mirror people discussing your story in front of you, right? And it's very, very valuable, because for the first time in your life, perhaps, you're hearing people talk about your stories, right? And in a way that you say, I did not say that, right? And you're not allowed to speak while the critique is going on, right? You're not allowed to explain, you're not allowed to say a word, at the end of which the facilitator might say, all right, say a few words, right? And then you'll go and explain what you intended to say, what the idea was, and then, but the fact is that people reading your story is after the fact, right? They did not see this, or they did see this. So that is the Iowa model, and it was basically copied in workshops across the world, and people who studied in these workshops ended up spreading this particular model in other places, right? So in Ashoka University, or in Korea University, or in the workshops that we conducted, we were basically following the same model, right? So if there are issues like, say in India, we like to discuss, we love charcha, right? And in the middle of a conversation, the writer wants to say, but stop going in that direction. I never intended to say that this person is so and so, right? The person has no choice; they have to keep quiet, right? And so you would find writers twitching because they don't agree; they're not listening anymore to what the comments are, right? So things like that. We knew that the model was not 100% adapted to local conditions. So we would tweak the techniques, we tweak the kind of stories we would give them. But at the end of the day, we were not addressing the writers. We were addressing their writing, which is a very, very, very different thing, right? So the books that you have read will be the kind of books you will write. And if you're not exposed to different kinds of books, you may never know the kind of writing you're capable of, right? So it's a very high chance people will say, I don't write science fiction, because they're not read enough science fiction, right? But then when they begin to read maybe 3 anthologies, 4 anthologies, suddenly they begin to get the hang of it. And they say, I see what this is doing. I want to write something different, but I see what this is doing. And they begin to attempt their first story or the second story. And there's a good response, far better response than if they write so-called literary story, right? And suddenly they find themselves writing that kind of fiction, right? So what workshops can do well is to expose you to a wide variety of stories in the time that they are given, right? So that's a good thing. But what they can't do for you is speak to you as a writer. There's very little time for that. So in most workshops, what they would do, they'd say, you have 15 minutes with the instructor. Right? In the course of the whole thing, maybe 2 weeks, I would meet with the writers for maybe 15 minutes or 20 minutes. We'll go for a walk, and they'll tell me or tell my colleagues what the issues they are facing. But you can imagine 15-20 minutes, it's hardly enough to capture a life, right? So it's always unsatisfactory for me, and I would always end up feeling that perhaps in that hurry to get the thing over, it has not been as useful as I had expected. Though at the end of the workshop, you'll almost always find that the participants are happy, they're glad they came, they say they're going to write stories, right? But in actual fact, if you look at what happens maybe a year later or 2 years later, we find the usual long curve, that long distribution. You will find 80% of the stories are being written by 20% of the participants, right? Most of the other participants will simply stop, right? And if you ask why did you stop? And I've actually asked writers, I liked your stories at the workshop. Why have you stopped writing? You'll get the usual reasons. I got a job, I was busy, I fell ill, and I'm going to get back to it, right? Thank you for asking, and I'll contact you at the end of the year, right? And end of the year I'll say, remember you said you're going to contact me at the end of the year. Then they're going to get guilty, right? I promised, I know I promised. And I said, relax, I'm not your examiner here, right? You're just trying to keep the motivation going. But something seems to have gone, right? When you're in the circle with our fellow writers, you're passionate, you're motivated, you want to write the next story, you have ideas in your head. But when those writers are removed, you find that the motor is somehow gone, right? And then you become guilty, a little anxious. It's always a kind of a half-remembered, and maybe a longing, right? That I should get back to it, and maybe when I retire, or maybe when I get a little more time, when I make some money, right? You keep putting it off. And I did not have good answers for why that was happening. So after some 5 years or 6 years of this same pattern over and over again, and people will tell you that, 20% of a class of 16 is good, right? If you are getting, say 20% of the people are writing, continuing to write, we should be happy with that, right? And that is definitely a good point of view. But personally, I felt that we do not understand what the real problems are. So in my work now, what I do is, when I meet a writer or someone sends me a story randomly across the web, or maybe they read something of mine, or maybe they submit something to the magazine that I edit, then you form a relationship and you say, I'd like to read more of your stories. And then we start a conversation, and sometimes we meet, sometimes we cannot meet. But it's an extended discussion where you actually get to know the writer much better than if you're in a workshop setting, right? So mentoring is where I think the direction of workshops would be most useful for a writer. So one example of a workshop I think that gets it right is South Asia Speaks, right? In South Asia Speaks, which is a series of annual scholarships that they give, and it's for, I think, translations primarily. So what you do is you apply, you're in the middle of a project, you're a translations project, and you need some help, you think you can use some mentorship. You apply to South Asia Speaks, you outline your project, and if you get if you're selected, they pair you with someone who is an experienced translator, maybe Aruna Vasinna, say, right? Or maybe one of the Kalpavish editors, right? And they'll pair you with somebody, and you work on your project with them for something like 3 months, right? So the critical problems in your project, when you're trying to struggle with a decision, you meet with them over Zoom, right? So that I think is much more helpful for a writer, because you're talking to the writer one-on-one, and the mentor comes to know what the issues are with your writing, right? Then they can help you much better than having a group of people comment on your story with no real stakes, right? For a group of 15 people to comment on your story, they have no stakes in the story, right? So they don't lose anything by saying this didn't work or this worked, or I think it's a better model. So that's the kind of thing I've been kind of leaning towards. So when this climate fiction thing said that give a master class in teaching writing, right? I said, yeah, we could do that. Right? I could talk about plot, or I could talk about point of view, or I would talk about characterization, or even science fiction. But it would end here, right? And I was hoping that in your own search for better instruction, right? There are thousands of books out there actually. In fact, I did a count. I went to Amazon and said, how many writing books are there, right? So it turns out there are, let's see, there are 2,000 books on quantum mechanics. Okay, there are 2,000 books roughly on quantum mechanics. On writing, there are 20,000 books. So obviously, writing is harder than quantum mechanics, right? So it's unbelievable the number of books out there that promise to teach you writing, right? So I don't think there is a lack of information out there as far as how to write is concerned. Interestingly, there are hardly any books by Indian authors on how to write. So Salman Rushdie has not written a book. Amitabh Ghosh has not written a book. Jhumpa Lahiri has not written a book, right? None of these people who they obviously write very well have sat down and written a book on writing. So the books that we do have are books from almost entirely from the US, right? And there's a smaller subset from UK. And the US books, they appear neutral. They will talk about, for example, they might say conflict is important in a story, right? And you'll say, all right, conflict is important. So you'll have writers, when they start out on the stories, try to find a conflict. Or they might say, like Stephen King, they might say, you must know what the character wants. I don't care if he wants what he just wants is a glass of water. But by God, you should want something. So you start thinking about what does my character want, right? So you start framing your approach to the story through these lens that essentially is an American lens, right? But in the Indian scheme of things, in the South Asian scheme of things, our model of aesthetics is a little different. So conflict is not the key word, I think. It is contrast, right? So in much of our cooking, for example, it's essentially balancing contrasts, right? And the whole rasa theory comes from the balancing of flavors, the balancing of savors, right? So when you say conflict, if you replace it with contrast, right, then you get a different kind of story, which is not necessarily violent, which is not necessarily action driven, right? But it is more driven by the play of context and foreground and background, right? So you find that if we had Indian writers talking about fiction and writing about the fiction the way that we experience it in Bollywood movies, in regional cinema, in the folk tales that we grew up with, I think we would have a different kind of writing instruction that is not available today, right? So even though there are lots of instruction out there, 20,000 books worth of instruction on how to write, it is mostly how to write English fiction with an American flavor, right? So I want you to keep that in mind. So I'm going to spend the rest of the 15 minutes opening the floor to questions. Ask me whatever. No question is too forbidden. So at most I'll lie. So go ahead. Yeah. Do you have time? Yeah.
What is the emotion that you find the hardest to write?
Right, yeah. So.
And the easiest.
Yeah. Thank you for asking that question. So the question she asked was, what's the emotion that I find hardest to write, and what's the easiest? So I think the easiest I think is humor, right? I find it very easy to be funny. So it's easy to be funny because funny is a defense, a self-defense mechanism, right? People who are very funny, people who crack jokes all the time, they have something to hide. And because I have a lot to hide, I'm always very humorous, right? So you ask me a personal question, I'll crack a joke, and you ask Apupan something, he'll crack a joke, right? So people who are funny are usually evasive. They're trying to hide something about themselves. it's not that they are sad people or anything. It's just that they don't necessarily want to give you the answer, right? So they change the topic with a little joke, right? And you're busy laughing, and you don't notice that the topic has been changed. So I find humor easy, but correspondingly, the thing that I find hardest, and I think a lot of us find it very hard, is to be honest. You know, it's not emotion, but it's a quality, right? So I find honesty very, very hard. So writing I can write very good fiction. I can write. It's not a problem at all, but I find that the quality of honesty, that it's a very special taste. It's not that you're being truthful. The truth and honesty are not exactly the same thing. It's that you're just telling the way you really feel about something, right? You really think about something, and that's tricky. And another writer who found it very hard was Hemingway. So Hemingway said that the hardest thing in the world is to write an honest sentence, right? And so once you master that, you find that your writing becomes accessible to all, because people can sense it. We are like children in that sense, right? We smell bullshit. So once we see honest writing, so memoirs are very powerful these days, because they come straight from here, right? So a lot of people are interested in memoirs because in the sea of writing, you think this writing is honest. It comes from a true place, from an honest place. But it doesn't have to be memoirs. I think in any fiction, you're just describing, say, Duryodhana's point of view, right? And you're describing it honestly, as he will see the world, not as he should see the world, or how an evil person he is, how, say, Duryodhana is seeing the world, right? Then you find that the writing acquires a different quality, because you're in their heads, talking with their tongue, right? And even though you may not agree with it at all, in fact, you may violently hate it, right? But it is important that you be honest with that character, and that's very difficult.
So one of your works, which is one of my favorite, The Beast with the 9 Million Feet, and it's a young adult.
Yes.
So you know how it is different when you write for young adults,
Yeah.
or and you write it for adults.
Yeah.
Also, you went for Clarion West
Yes.
workshop. So how did it work out for you? I mean, if you could get some takings that you learned there, or something that
Yeah.
we can also apply.
Okay. All right. So Clarion West is still going on. It's probably the most well-known workshop in speculative fiction. Okay, and it's held in Seattle. There are two places. One is Seattle, and I think San Diego. And I went when it was in Seattle, and it's a 6-week workshop. So it's a residential workshop, and for 6 weeks you go there, and every week there's a different instructor, right? So you get exposed to a bunch of different styles, and every week you write a story. So you have 6 stories coming out at the end of it, and you'll be reading a lot of stuff. You'll be reading a French story, so it's intensive. You feel really pressured. So I just finished. I just decided that I have done with software. I lost interest in software engineering, and a little bit of money in the bank. And I said I need to do something else. And I was looking for the novels of Jeff Ryman. So Jeff Ryman is a British writer, and I was reading his works. And those days Google had just come out, So I was searching for Jeff Ryman's works, and I heard that he's teaching at some place called Clarion West, and it's a workshop. Now, for engineers, don't really have workshops, So I didn't even know what a workshop was. Workshop, like, what the hell is a workshop? We don't sit around analyzing programs, like, tell me what you think of my program, right? It doesn't happen. So, and the concept was a little difficult for me to grasp. So I write a story, and then these 16 people sit and, give me their comments unasked, right? But he was teaching there in the 3rd week. So I went there, and I just decided that I was going to take up writing. So I didn't know, because they're all Americans, right? And as an Indian, I wasn't sure where I stood in the scheme of things, whether I could really write fiction, for example, right? So that is a very useful experience, because it allows you to calibrate where you are, how your stories are received, what your level of fluency is, and whether you have the sophistication to be in this world, right? And for me, the takeaway was the idea of the workshop, how powerful it was. So I would see that writers who came in, and as the weeks progressed, their stories would get better and better, right? They would stop making the simple mistakes. And the professors, what you learn from the professors, call them professors, facilitators, is something that Feynman said. Feynman said that what you learn from an instructor is not the content, right? What you learn is a style. You learn a certain style, a certain way of looking at the world. And that's definitely what these people brought. So Jeff Feynman was very irreverent, right? So for example, this slightly politically incorrect, I had a scene where a man was cheating on his wife. So I'd written the scene and the class was, the people were discussing it. And while he's cheating on his wife, the phone rings and it's his wife on the line, right? So his wife is calling him while he's in the middle of the act, so to speak. And so I'd written the scene, so I written it delicately, right? Camouflaging the word and so on. And Jeff said, he called a stop to the critiques. I want to see his balls, Menon. I was like, what the hell? So every time I write a scene now that is intimate, right? I hear Jeff's words, show me the balls. And it's not necessarily useful advice, right? It's not exactly you have to be explicit in your writing, but it's that style I remember, that like, don't censor yourself, right? That's a motto. So all the instructors had their style, their way of approaching fiction. That was very useful. As for regarding The Beast, it was the first novel I wrote, so you're always embarrassed that people like it because you think, I would love to rewrite it, right? So I've not written for young adults. It's a really hard audience. It's a really hard audience, right? And in the market at that time, it was not well developed, young adult audience. So I moved out into the adult space.
Yeah, just to continue with this Clarion West, just a question. These days, I think Clarion West has gone online. So, do you think that it will be like anything good as a residential program, just joining it as online?
Yeah, I think it's better than not going for it, right? It's useful, but economics, they can reach a lot more people.
Right.
And I think that actually being there, right? But I think there's nothing like actually living with 15 other people and getting to know them, and that bonding that happens and so on, right? You get a community at the end of the day.
Yeah.
So, and they would do things like they would introduce you to the local science fiction fans.
Right.
So you would get to read in front of people, right? All which are very important as a writer.
Yeah. And another small question, sir. You said that while you are doing that Clarion West, and you know that what are the simple mistakes. So, can you give us some example of some simple mistakes that you have encountered as a genre writer?
Yeah.
So that like any of us, when we try to do it, maybe
you
it
can
will
make the
be.
same mistake.
Yeah. Some simple examples.
The first mistake is writing it off. It's so much easier to just tell your friends the story. The first and one of the most common mistakes is this jumping from people's heads, points of view. You are with a character, right? And you're watching some scene, and then some other character enters, and the writer will suddenly jump to their heads, right? And you're actually in a nice car, right? You're going in a nice car, you're seeing a certain scenery, and suddenly you're in another car, and that transition is not smooth. So you feel a jerk, it keeps jerking, right? And you can do it very smoothly. So that segue takes some skill. So that's one thing that. Another thing is that famous show versus tell, where you are describing for the author what's happening rather than actually giving them a sense of what it is to be in that scene, right? So these two are probably the biggest hurdles, and both are kind of tricky to work, right? And sometimes you do need to tell to move the story forward. You can't always keep showing, right? Then you have an art movie, but sometimes you do find that balance is difficult.
You have a question, right?
Hello, sir. Sir, I just had this query. Like, there are authors, who write. They start writing and they are writing for a long period of time, and they are authors too. But then there are like academicians who were academics for a long time, and then after working with a particular field, they for around a couple of decades, they think of producing fiction. And then again, when such academicians turn authors, write fictions, and if particularly they have a motto behind it. I mean, it can be ideological or political or social, and it's a very informed writing.
Yeah.
And like I've gone through both the writings, and what I feel is when I read works of authors who are authors, I can find the creative genius behind it. I mean, I really enjoy such works. But when it comes to academicians turned authors, of course I do enjoy their works as well, but I mean, I'm not able to derive that kind of literary pleasure behind it. So, I mean, this struggle is it an endless struggle, or, I mean, something can be chalked out between the two?
Yeah. So I will begin with the theory that I told my friend here yesterday, which is the theory of the three sentences, right? So the theory of the three sentences go like this. Every story consists of three kinds of sentences, right? There is the first sentence, first kind of sentence is a sentence you write, the author writes, right? And that I have total control over. So I'll say it's raining, and I don't have to say I just say it's raining, and that's what I feel like saying, right? So I put that down. The second kind of sentence is a sentence that I don't need to write because both you and the reader share the word. I don't have to say it's raining water. Of course it rains water, right? So that's how it rains on this planet, right? So that word is unnecessary. I don't have to write it, right? So there are sentences like that I don't need to write because you and the author, the reader share that word. The third kind of sentence is the one that you write, the reader, right? You finish the story. So I may say the queen died, and the king died of grief, right? Now you will put it in your head. You will finish the story. You will get into a romantic genre, right? If you're a doctor, you might ask, I wonder if he died of an heart attack, right? That's the kind of sentence that the reader is writing, right? So with these three sentences make up the story, right? So when you read an academic, you know that it's written by an academic, right? So and writing a fiction, right? And you're approaching it with some suspicion, right? So that affects the reading, right? If you did not know it was an academician, right? Then it's a different matter. We know there are academicians who have written great novels, like say Umberto Eco, right? Or A.S. Bayat, right? So it's not that that you can't do it. But yes, there are certain habits of writing, expressing yourself will appear in the final word. So you can train yourself out of it, right? But I would like to make another one final point, which I think is important, is that I think all of us have it. I'm often asked, you were X, you were a software engineer. And sometimes even I say things like I was a software engineer, or I did this, right? I'll show you're a writer, I'll say I'm a writer, right? But in actual fact, these are just made up things, right? You're also many other things, right? So there's no reason why you can't have an interest in math without being a mathematician. There's no reason why you can't have an interest in writing without necessarily being a writer, right? We are so flexible, we're almost plastic, right? So if you get interested in the Second World War for a novel, I can guarantee you that within a few months, you will know a lot about the Second World War. That will reach the level of expertise. Right? You'll be reading everything around it, you'll be motivated, you'll be studying dress, you'll be studying the food they ate, you'll be studying the war theaters, and pretty soon you're kind of an expert on major wars that happened in the Second World War, right? So the idea that you're not a historian, right? It is something that's imposed out externally. So I think it's the internal labels that we apply. We should always kind of push back against it. Even in public, it might be useful to say I'm a writer. I think overall, you should keep pushing back because it limits you, right? So don't do that. So I am also an editor, right? I have translated stories, right? But because they're not as much a part of my written career except writing, now I'm a writer. But 20 years or 25 years ago, I was publishing papers, then I would have been a researcher, right? So you should keep that in mind, right? Not to let it limit you.
Thank you so much, sir.
Any other questions? You have to
I have a small query. Actually, I am not sure if this is the right place to ask this question, but my question is, are peer reviewed journals are neutral?
Peer reviews of?
peer-reviewed journals are apolitical or neutral?
No, they're never
Hmm.
neutral, right?
Actually, I presented a lot of papers and I have written.
Yeah.
So I got reviews that my writings are biased, and I defended that I
Yes.
have lived experiences.
Yes.
So I got answers that lived experiences are political sometimes. Also, newspaper cuttings. So, in a democratic country, I mean, newspaper has a significant role in a democratic country. So they are also saying that they are defending that these are fake news. But lived experiences are also they are saying that maybe political. But I am getting reviews that you should refer to and you should read peer-reviewed journals. But I don't think they are neutral.
Yeah. So they're not neutral, and you find, for example, when you see something like poverty, say India or Africa, right? And usually it'll be in Western journals, and the whole measurements of these things would be all peer-reviewed, all decided by experts, but they don't necessarily have an understanding of how life is on the ground, right? So everything comes from a context, right? So it's not when someone says this is the truth, right? The answer is according to whom, right? Especially in human affairs. So I don't think you should be concerned with the specific criticism that you get, right? Because we're going to get criticism, but you should also have a certain way to check your opinions with the world, right? So for not necessarily that you let them tell you what to think, but that you say it is possible for me to make mistakes about the way I reason about the world or think about the world or a situation, because we are all human, right? So I need someone to tell me, someone I trust to tell me when I might be making. That is truly the scientific attitude. Science cannot be done by one person, it can only be done by two people. Because one person makes the hypothesis and the test, the other person is there to say, yeah, it checks out, right? So for your own sake, to make sure that you have an accurate representation as far as you're concerned, right? You should find someone you trust to tell you, I think this is perfectly the way it is, right?
Sir, actually, on my PPT, there are pictures from the Telegraph, Gujarat riot.
Yes.
Those are authentic news.
Yes.
But they said that this might be fake.
Yeah, that they say that. They might say, obviously they will say it's a fake because they don't want to hear, right? So,
I said that I have lived experience.
Yes.
They said that your experience might be political.
Yeah. Thank you for your.
How should I defend? I could.
No, you don't defend it. You don't, because you are defending against people who may not be willing to hear, right? But what you do is what writers do when they get a rejection, which is you send it to the next editor, right? Right? So the art of rejection. There's a lovely book in case all of you are interested. I think it's called The Art of Rejection. It is by this Chinese guy who devoted 100 days of his life to getting rejected, right? So he'll get up in the morning and say, today I'm going to get rejected, right? And he'll go out in the street and he'll go to say, he's living in Texas, I think. It's not exactly the friendliest of neighborhoods. He'll walk up to in his colony, he'll knock on a door and he'll say, can I use your lawnmower? Now the guy just looks at him, and when someone comes and tells you, can I use your lawnmower? The first question is, what the hell? But very often he found that guy will say, yeah, sure, right? Because he don't know what to say to that person. So he found that just steeling himself, getting ready to be rejected, right, took away that stress of, you can't handle it, you can't do it. He just got used to it. And then the good experiences began building up. When he thought he would be rejected, but he actually found that people would cooperate, people would help. They're so startled, right? He'll go to, say, McDonald's and say, I know you have all this on the menu, can you make this for me, right? And the whole concept of McDonald's is that you just point to the number, man, right? Like, didn't you read the memo, right? And but he found a place in, I think, Chicago. Sure, the person said, right? And then he went back to the back of the store and made him the sandwich that he wanted, right? So the book is about when you decide that you're going to take charge of the rejections. Like, you're not going to let the feelings that you feel normally, that something is wrong with the manuscript, something is wrong with the way I approached. It's more like, oh, there's always the next situation, right? You change your attitude to it. You just see it as another way to retransform yourself. It is not easy, it's hard, but I can tell you for a fact that if you keep getting rejected in your career as a writer, by approximately the 6th year, I think, it stops mattering, right? you just go on to the next, and they'll confirm, they are the academics, right? They get rejected all the time. So, yeah, you just send it to the next journal, right?
Sir, I have another. Is it ethical to say that your he explicitly mentioned that your experience is political,
Yeah.
and he is a lawyer.
Yeah.
Is it ethical to say someone?
Yeah, suppose I say it is not ethical, right? Would that change the outcome? No, it won't, right? So as far as you're concerned, that transaction is over. In fact, what it has told you is that what you wrote affected them so deeply, right? That they felt compelled to be honest about what and defend themselves, right? It is unethical, you're telling lies, you're biased, right? It really aroused emotions. So when sometimes when editors reject stories, it's not because they didn't like the stories. It's because it got through to them, and they just found it. Even a strong reaction is actually telling you something about that. Your article did touch something deep in them. It cut through all the veils of protection they might have built around themselves, right? So as far as my thing would be, just move on, right? Because
Also, he said that you should focus on women and children. Why are you? Actually, my paper was on Gaza genocide. So they said that why are you not talking about Irish oppression and other oppression? Why are you talking only about Gaza? And then I defended. Then they said that you should focus on women and children. Then I did not say anything, but then a question comes in my mind that man's lives are also vulnerable. Like in India, the mob lynching that happened, mob lynchings, most of them are men. They are men.
yeah,
So why should I talk only about women and
you
children?
don't, right? In fact,
I should talk about humanity.
the recent book that won the award in the Tata, no, the Godrej Lit Life Prize, was on the Godhra riots, right? If you read it, the build up to, I forget the name of the book. Neha Dixit, I think. No, yeah. She's now based in the US. So it is written by exactly that. The series of events that led to the riots, the whole meltdown in Gujarat. And in contrast to the reception that you got with this particular editor, this particular person, it was a literary award, right?
It was in a conference.
It was in a conference, right? Yeah. So you will add a response as a reader. Don't right?
Some journals where you can send it to, which will be more receptive, and that's what.
Yeah.
So maybe after the session, come over and tell us
You have
what
to
you
build
want.
your army.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah.
So just tell. Maybe you need to send it to the right journals that will want to have these conversations.
Yeah.
as well.
You cannot be a writer by yourself. You have to have a community, right? So you cannot be an academician by yourself. You need a community. So always you think that where do I get my community, right? You'll find them. Right? So,
Awesome. I think we're running out of time. There's so many questions I'm sure that are waiting, but we're going to have to take
Yeah.
it after this. But thank you so much, Anil. I mean, it's absolute generosity again that I want to thank you for taking time out, but also the patience with which you've responded to all the questions.
Yeah.
So thank you so much for
Yeah,
your
welcome.
time
Thank you, guys.
here. Thanks.
Before we start the screening,
Yeah.
we'll call upon